Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. It's nice to see you again, those I've seen in the last couple of sessions. My name is Joe Lurie. I am here with a group of people to help talk about Microsoft Connected Cache and delivery optimization. We'll get to their introduction in just a few minutes. One thing I want to I'm going to throw it out there and I'm going to step in front of the bus and say a lot of you know me as the person that renamed DOINC, Delivery Optimization in Network Cache is what it was first called when we were first designing it. I came in, I'm like, I don't like the name DOINC. Can we change it? And we changed it to Connected Cache. I do get a lot of mail from that, so keep the fan letters coming. So I'm going to start off with a question about pre-populating the cache. So tell me, I'm going to start with Andy, and then you can tell me who on the crew might be better. And I'm going to ask you all to please introduce yourselves before you answer your first question, just so everyone knows who they're talking to. But the first question that's already come in, can the cache be pre-populated, like Windows Server Update Services, WSUS, so it's available before the client even requests it? Can we pre-populate the connected cache?
Hey, good morning, Joe. Thanks. My name is Andy Rivas, Principal Product Manager working on Microsoft Connected Cache. Some of you out there have met me or seen me before maybe, so glad to see you again. Good morning. Have my coffee here. This is a question that we frequently receive. So Microsoft Connected Cache is not Windows Server Update Services, and therefore cannot be pre-populated in the same way. It has no knowledge of what content is being cached. It is receiving requests from clients and then caching that content on demand. However, that doesn't mean that you cannot pre-populate the cache with content based on rings. So if you could see using Intune or using
We'll just say Intune.
Batch, you can create rings, and you could have a seeder ring that could request the content first. Content is then populated in the cache, and then you could have other leechers could then pull that content from the cache. But once again, you cannot pre-populate the content in the same way you can as WSUS, meaning you can't individually check the content that you would like to have populated.
That makes sense. Chris, I see you nodding your head a lot. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Andy covered great. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris. I'm a product manager also on the Connected Cache team. But yeah, I think Andy did a great job covering it.
Let me ask you all this, and Carmen, you can pipe in as well. I just read a blog. It's exciting that Connected Cache is now generally available. What does that mean? And if it wasn't generally available before, customers have been using it for quite a while. It's even in the Intune Win32s, right? So if it wasn't generally available, what does it mean now that it is generally available? Chris, I'll start with you, and then
me.
Sure. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, sure. So for Azure services and Connected Cache is hosted in Azure, and for any Microsoft product, GA, general availability, signifies that that product or service is in a stable production-ready state, meaning that it's fully supported by Microsoft as well. So one of the checklist sign-off items that that Microsoft services and products have to go through is we have to ensure that our customer service, that our customer support services are ready to go to support a product. And so we went through a process with them, and they were part of our development team. Actually, they joined some of our weekly stand-ups, for example, that we did. We provided them with lots of information. They were part of early preview customer threads where there were issues that they were troubleshooting. And so that's really one of the main components there is you can be sure that our customer support globally is ready to go to help support that product. And also it means that my management team, my skip level, my VP level person has signed off on this release, and Microsoft is committed to supporting this for years moving forward.
Nice. It's a great explanation. I appreciate that. We have a question on X, and as most of you know, we are streaming this on Microsoft Tech Community, on LinkedIn, on X, so you can find us in your favorite streaming area, I suppose. I think YouTube maybe as well. It's been a while since I looked at delivery optimization. What's in this new space? And is delivery optimization a replacement? Does connected cache replace delivery optimization? How does that work together?
So I can take that one.
Thanks, Carmen.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Carmen Forsman. I am a product manager on the same general team as Chris and Andy, but I focus on the DO side. So when you think about DO, it's probably synonymous with P2P. But really, the way I like to explain it is, when you think about this platform, at the heart of all of it is the delivery optimization client. And from this, it's just an HTTP downloader. And there's several different policies that you can use to really dial in how you use this technology that works best for your organization. And built on top of that are these optimizations. So P2P being one of them. You don't have to use P2P with DO, even though I think that's how most people think of it, but it truly is just an optimization for that. And then now we've introduced MCC. So they are complements of each other. And it's really all focused on what can we build on this platform, on that DO client that you can use together to get the best results to manage your bandwidth in your organization.
Thanks. I just want to clarify for any assistive readers, when you say P2P, you're talking about peer-to-peer.
Peer-to-peer
caching.
Sorry.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to spell that out for the assisted readers,
Yep.
just in case that was necessary. All right, great. We have a question from Joe on Tech Community. It's about Configuration Manager. Is there any chance that a Configuration Manager distribution point running connected cache will be able to report up to the Azure portal? What are our thoughts on that integration with Configuration Manager and the reporting coming out of that?
Well, Joe, so there are no plans today to have the configuration manager that is running, the connected cache that's running on the configuration manager DPs report up through Azure. However, if you are using the Windows Update for business reports, your clients can still report up through there, and you can still get data on those clients that have downloaded content from that connected cache server on the DP.
So
Yep.
even though the updates are coming from Configuration Manager, they're still DO supported. The Windows Update for business reports will still report that back.
Correct. It should, as long as and now this would be, I suppose, if you're running in a co-managed environment and you are utilizing WFB reports today, you will be able to see that data from those delivery optimization clients, because every delivery optimization client reports data up to our services. So if you're utilizing WFB reports and that client is downloading from a configuration manager DP deployed connected cache, you will see data on them. But there is no planned Azure integration with the configuration manager.
Gotcha.
DP deployed MCC and the current reports that you would see for connected cache on this latest version we've released.
Nice. Chris, I see you doing a lot of nodding on that. Do you have anything you want to expand on that?
No, I think Andy's completely correct there. I would also say, for customers that do want to move to using this new connected cache standalone version, there is a lot of great integration with the Azure portal for that version of Connected Cache. We have a lot of data that you can see in the Azure portal, not just, the WolfBee reports, I think today cover a lot of the client side data. So if you're trying to see from your device's point of view, how they're downloading from the Connected Cache, the WolfBee reports, the Windows Update for Business reports are the best place to go. But if you're interested in seeing, the amount of egress from your Connected Cache node itself, we would definitely recommend moving over to using the standalone version so that you do get that Azure portal integration. And we have some great telemetry data streams that show up in the Azure portal there.
Nice, great. Thanks for that explanation as well. Do we know if Connected Cache, we know that Microsoft Connected Cache is now generally available. How about in our sovereign clouds, GCC, GCC High? What's the plan on getting? Maybe it's already generally available in GCC, GCC High, though I don't think so. What are our plans there? And Carmen, I think for delivery optimization as well, if you want to start with that, and then we can go into MCC.
Right. So from the delivery optimization standpoint with regard to these, and we get this question a lot. Currently, we've been taking the stance of if a device in those environments can break out to the internet, then you can use our service. That is generally the case. That is not always the case, but from what I have learned in a lot of those situations, that seems to work. We're really taking the lead of Windows Update here. So when that service is available in those spaces, that's when you'll see delivery optimization go that way. I believe the same is true for MCC. And currently that is not being planned for at the moment.
Okay, thanks. And so DO, MCC.
I have nothing to add there. Yes, Carmen summarized it beautifully. There's no short-term plan. I'm not part of any discussions for future releases to move MCC into GCC or GCCI. I'm sorry for those of you who are disappointed.
It's tough.
By that, but yeah.
Thanks, Carmen. Thanks, Andy. We have a question from Paul on Tech Community, and this is about the end user experience. In a small office setup, what's the smallest, this is a multi-part question. What's the smallest reasonable timeout for devices to wait for Connected Cache content? If I set it to several minutes, as was recommended to me, I'm not sure, Paul, what your recommendation is there, but if I set it to several minutes, sometimes I see big delays in clients starting to download files. I wouldn't want my users to experience such a delay. So first, what's the smallest reasonable timeout that I should set, and what's that recommendation? And also, do we have any troubleshooting guides that we can point Paul to on why Connected Cache might not be working as expected or as quickly as expected? Chris, we'll start with you on that one. What do you think on the smallest timeout that you would recommend?
Yeah, so to give a little bit more clarity here, I believe, and Carmen, correct me if I'm wrong here, the way that the timeout works is it's essentially not a delay. It's just how long should the client wait before it decides to fall back to downloading from another source other than the Connected Cache. And so if you're seeing this long delay where you're waiting a couple minutes before your device actually starts to download from the cache, changing the timeout, I don't believe will change that delay. That delay, that latency is coming from somewhere else in your network. If you change the timeout to be shorter, then essentially, if your delay is still the same based on your network configuration, then your devices will never download from the Connected Cache node. They'll just essentially immediately fall back to downloading from CDN. So it definitely, without knowing more details about your network, I couldn't say for sure, but I would take a look at seeing, what is causing that delay. Because again, that timeout configuration parameter isn't responsible for the delay itself. It's just how long should my device wait before I decide, okay, I can't connect to the Connected Cache node. I'm going to fall back to CDN or peer-to-peer or some other source. Yeah.
So the expectation then is that it should start immediately.
It should, yeah. Again,
and the delay is if it doesn't start immediately, wait 3 minutes, wait 5 minutes, wait 10 minutes before you fall back to that content distribution network or CDN. Carmen, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think Chris answered it well. I guess I would just say in general, I start with delays of like 30 seconds for foreground, 60 seconds for background. But as Chris kind of pointed to, maybe there's something else going on there. So We do have a configuration page I can link to in the
Yep.
doc, recommendations for different configs of all the different DO configs. I think there's almost 30 of them. You'll see the MCC things in there. We'll continually be updating those, but these are common things that people want to know, specifically around recommendations. But again, maybe this is a different issue, but it will be good to know that exists. So
Yeah, if you can,
can
go
drop
ahead,
that.
Andy.
Yeah, I was actually just going to comment on Paul's question with two things. So one, we would be really curious to get more details on your exact scenario and what delays you're seeing as far as troubleshooting guide and diagnosing. Within the Microsoft Connected Cache documentation, there is a troubleshooting section, but even before that, once you have deployed your connected cache server, you can run through a pretty simple download test that would help you validate that the connected cache server is operating. So that's one, and I think Joe can do this, but I actually put a link for the tech community, connected cache tech community. There it is, where questions or comments like this, the community can put it there. There are already a few very active members in the community who have been working with us, who are going to be very helpful. And this is a place to go if you have comments, questions, troubleshooting, things like that.
Yep, that's aka.ms/connected cache community. And that links you right to our tech community page, where it's full discussion, threaded discussions, where you can search for questions, answers. And again, it's aka.ms/connected cache community. All right, let's get back to some questions. This is flying by. On LinkedIn, we got a question. Is there any plan to reduce the minimum drive size for connected cache? It'll be helpful to have smaller size available for testing this feature in our lab. I've noticed that connected cache setup for Intune sometimes fails due to insufficient drive space on the C drive. And I think that's a great point on, I want to test this out. I'm using a virtual machine. I don't have 100 gigs free. Any plan to reduce that minimum drive size for connected cache? And we'll start with Carmen, because I saw you nod your head first.
Oh, no, I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't know if that's been talked about or not. I know it's configurable on the DO side, but I'm not sure about on MCC.
Yeah, I can jump in here, and then Andy, if you want to chime in as well. Yeah, you might have noticed if you look at our GA release notes, the current minimum required size is 100 gigabytes. It is, relatively large, but the main reasoning here is because for a lot of these customers that are using connected cache in order to streamline the bandwidth for their networks, a lot of times the main spikes in their bandwidth are coming from very large updates, right? So we're talking about 80 gigabyte application updates and things like that. And so for a lot of these customers, if you set the connected cache drive size to be smaller than 100 gigabytes, you actually won't be able to cache some of those updates, and you won't be able to see the benefits there. It's a good point. Maybe there's a different scenario where customers want to have specifically smaller size just because they know they're only going to be testing it with smaller updates. That's feedback that we can take back to our team and try to see if there's a way to configure that. But as of today, the minimum drive size is 100 gigabytes because it's intended for production, primarily for production methods, and we want to make sure that customers are realizing the benefits of the cache there.
Thanks, Chris. There's a couple of links I'm going to throw out there. You talked about the Microsoft Connected Cache Enterprise release notes, and you can find that at aka.ms/MCC-ENT-release-notes. So again, it's MCC Enterprise and release notes. And also you talked about, it's great feedback, and I'd love to point to where they can give additional feedback. And you can give additional feedback at aka.ms/Intune feedback on any of that feedback. And also, because DO is available within the enterprise, the Intune Admin Center, when you're delivering like a Win32 app, you can use the feedback within the Intune Admin Center as well. But aka.ms Intune feedback. There's one last link I'm going to give, so I hope the producers are keeping up with us. So aka.ms/do-fix. That's our delivery optimization troubleshooter. Again, it's aka.ms/do-fix. And I think that might help with Paul's question as well, on, is there some way that we can, troubleshoot, a troubleshooting guide. I think that'll get you started, Paul.
Yeah, just to kind of plug the fact that delivery optimization and Microsoft Connected Cache are Microsoft's comprehensive solution for helping customers minimize internet bandwidth usage. Connected Cache does not exist without DO. Bottom line. So this DO troubleshooter, actually, Carmen and her team have built to add Microsoft Connected Cache checking functionality into it. And this is something that we've also recently, as recently as last week, actually have been talking about how we can make improvements to the DO troubleshooter to help customers debug more MCC issues as well.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Thanks, Carmen, and your team for building that, and Andy for expanding on it. So we have a question from our friend Stephen, our frequent supporter Stephen on Tech Community. And I've heard this before from my customers as well. Is it possible to avoid having 3 client requests DO content before it starts to be added to the MCC cache? In other words, it just have it come to the cache immediately. Avoid having 3 client requests first before it's added to the cache. Carmen, is that configurable setting?
No, it's not a configurable setting. You could.
Yeah. So I actually have the answer to this question.
Okay.
Vary header. Has anybody heard of the Vary header? VARY. So Vary is a CDN header for requests that get sent to servers that says don't cache this content. And we have no control over the CDN that the DO and then Microsoft Connected Cache, which forwards that request, pulls from. But the CDN is sending Connected Cache this Vary header, which is telling us not to cache. This is actually something that's been on our list of some way that we can work around this in the cache server. But yes, there is this header, unfortunately. But yeah, feedback taken. It is definitely one of the smaller items that's next on our list to sort of help customers work around this CDN limitation.
And that was the Vary header, VARY header.
VARY, yes.
So for those of you catching this on the recording, or those of you that are live want to go back to the recording, somewhere around 21 minutes into the recording, Andy started talking about that Vary header. So you can go back a little bit and learn a little bit about the Vary header, but also go into our feedback. Again, go to our feedback portal and start asking, sending us that feedback that you want DO to be able to cache that content with 1 request, 2 requests. So again, that's aka.ms/connected cache community and aka.ms/Intune feedback. All right, we have, I think, time for one more question. What is the best way to configure delivery optimization clients to use Connected Cache? Chris, how do we configure the clients to use Connected Cache? What's the best way to configure that?
Yeah, great question. I think I'll say my piece, and then I think, Carmen, you also have the expertise here. But essentially, you can configure it using Intune. That's definitely one of the easiest ways that we've seen customers be able to push this configuration down to the delivery optimization client on their Windows machines. There is specific documentation that we have in the delivery optimization public documentation that allows you to see which are the specific configurations you'll want to change. It's DO cache host and DO cache host source, so that you can then direct your Windows machines to then download content first from the Connected Cache.
Yeah, and I'll just add on there. So in that the link to the config page, there is a section specifically on using Connected Cache. So there's really just a few settings there. So we have the DO cache host setting, as Chris mentioned. We have the cache host source setting, which I think he also mentioned. We talked about delaying. So delaying the fallback to the HTTP source if you want to kind of manage that. So there's those policies. And then if you don't want to use MCC on VPN, we also have added that as a new config.
Oh, that's nice.
And yeah, so those are what we currently have available today for MCC. In my experience, someone who doesn't work specifically on MCC day in and day out like these guys do, it's super easy to set up. Like it's pretty quick, and it just happens. And so once you set that server in the DO cache host, it just starts pulling from it. And if it doesn't, then you run the troubleshooter and figure out what's the problem, and that should get you going. So it should be pretty straightforward.
That's awesome. And again, that to configure delivery optimization, aka.ms/configure.do, and one more plug for that troubleshooter, aka.ms/do fix to run that troubleshooter.
I have one more bit to add to this question.
Go ahead.
So I think part of this question that's being asked is how to configure. Really, there are multiple ways to configure. You can statically configure using DO cache host, but if you want to use our more dynamic method, that's where you use the DO cache host source, which relies on a DHCP custom object. We're also, for future releases, looking at how we can make this more automatic so that you don't even have to worry about configuring. But once again, if you want more automatic, DO cache host source. If you're good with configuring manually, DO cache host.
Thank you so much, Andy, Chris, Carmen. I wish we had more time to get to any other questions. We will keep those questions coming. The link to this, if you close this tab, when you come back, aka.ms/AMA/connected cache. Thank you for joining us. The QA, the question and answer section, will remain open through 12 p.m. Pacific time, or 12 noon Pacific time this Friday. I don't know the date of, I should have looked at that after my last one saying I don't know the date of Friday. But keep those questions coming. aka.ms/AMA/connected cache. Next up, it's our Ask Microsoft Anything on Windows and your AI experiences. And you can get right to that session starting in about 3 minutes at aka.ms/AMA/Windows AI to post your questions. Everyone, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for all your questions. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.